our relationship with pleasure is so messed up. We always talk about pleasures as a guilty pleasure or reward after we've been a good girl or something that is, again, to be enjoyed by somebody else. Like, of course, it's okay for somebody else to enjoy your body for their pleasure, but God forbid you enjoy your own body for your own pleasure. Like, we just want to start.
How much sex when you're really in it, and I think truly enjoying yourself, maybe I'm speaking just for myself, has very little to do with what you look like and a lot more to
Yeah.
do with what you feel, and what your body is doing for you and what you're receiving, what you're giving. And I think a lot of times, especially as women, we're taught to be desired and that is part of our
Yes.
pleasure. And we don't really think about, well, what do I like? What am I feeling? What is my body doing for me? And I think when you appreciate your body from what it actually is giving you and the experiences you can have that are only just for you, even if another person
Yeah.
is helping you feel those things, it gives you such a different experience altogether that takes you away from something distracting, such as body image.
But a relationship, if you've been socialized as a woman in general, right? It's so much of our worth and everything is put into being an object of desire and being an object of pleasure for other people. And we have been taught and been wired to feel turned on or to feel pleasure when we are wanted, when we are desired, because we've been told so much of our worth and our validation comes from that. And so when we've been taught and socialized in that way, of course, it's harder to switch into this place of like just receiving and enjoying and not worrying about how are they looking at my body or what does my body look like in this position or what are they thinking or are they having a good time? Are they enjoying themselves? Am I taking too long? Like all of the things that go through our mind, which has more to do with getting into the mind of our partner instead of really truly allowing ourselves to experience it from our own perspective.
Welcome to the Binge Breakers podcast. I'm Jacqueline. I am here to teach you how I overcame bulimia and my binge eating disorder and how you can too. Through simple steps of mind management, repairing your relationship with yourself, understanding your habits, and intuitive eating.
Disclaimer, this recording is not intended to be used as medical advice, nor is it advice from a doctor. I am a coach, a recovery coach, and I offer advice from my own experience and my clients. But please, if you think you are in need of medical help, seek it immediately. We'll also be talking about subjects such as binging and purging, depression, and other sensitive topics. So if those trigger you, please listen at your own discretion. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, drum roll. I don't know why I did that. It's not even a drum roll. Today, we have a very special guest and a special topic that, I'll be honest, I've avoided like the plague for this whole podcast. And the honest reason is because I felt like I had work to do in my own journey with it. What we're talking about today is sex and pleasure. So if you have any young ones listening, or I don't know, although I have feelings about that, I feel like younger people should be educated on sex a lot more than what I was as a child. But if you don't want to listen to it, if you're uncomfortable with that, or you have people around you listening that you think shouldn't listen to this podcast because we're going to talk about that, get out of the episode now. I'll wait, give you a second. Okay, you gone? Cool. Awesome. All the cool people are still here to talk about it. Great. But yeah, no, I have Danielle Savory on the podcast today, who is the host of It's My Pleasure podcast. And I followed Danielle since 2020, I think, is when I discovered her. Her podcast is all about helping women and really anyone experience more pleasure in their life and get comfortable in their body and have way more orgasms. And she joined me on the podcast today to discuss lots of different questions you guys asked me on Instagram. I reached out to all my groups. I reached out on our Facebook group and I was like, I'm talking to this person about this stuff. What do you want to know? And a lot of people ask me things. I didn't ask every single question, but I asked her questions that centered around the core topics of what people asked me, which is, how do I get out of my head during sex? I find it hard to be comfortable in my body during sex. How do I even want to enjoy this? Or like, why is it even relevant for me to want to have pleasure? And the reason that I'm talking about this on this podcast, even though this is a bulimia recovery and binge eating recovery podcast is because something Danielle and I touch on, which you'll hear about, is that having a sexual relationship is not, and experiencing good sex and experiencing pleasure in this life through sex, it's not just about it's not about sex really, it's about yourself is what I'm trying to say. And knowing how to receive pleasure from others, but also from yourself, and how to give yourself pleasure and allow that in your life and not think it's a bad thing or not be resistant to it or think you just shouldn't want that. It teaches you a lot about how to receive other good things, how to experience nice things in your life in general. It's not just about sexual pleasure. So, and then how to embody yourself truly, fully. And I feel like someone that is owning their sexuality and their need for pleasure in this life and how to give that to themselves, they become a completely different person and they become quite a powerful individual. And I found this to be my own journey in experiencing what sex means to me and how to be more empowered in that sort of part of my life. I used to be very resistant to that part of my life. And I think my bulimia and binge eating negatively impacted my sex life and my perceptions of sex on top of other things in my own life, which I talk about more on the podcast. And doing my own work in this area has expedited everything else I've learned about self-healing, self-improvement, and just being my own person, my own soul in this world. So if that all to be said, if you see the title of this podcast or you think, oh, I don't even care about sex anymore. I'm done with that part of my life. I hate sex. I don't even want it in any way. Or if I do want it, I don't want to want it. You have a lot of bitter feelings about it and you feel resistant or ashamed of it. I think this episode's going to be very important for you to listen to. And I highly recommend that even if you feel like, oh, I'm just uncomfortable with it, I don't want to talk about this at all. I don't want to hear about it. Then my friend, please listen to this episode coming from someone who used to feel that way. And I've worked with people who have felt this way. I highly recommend this episode. I do want to add one caveat to this episode, though, that I was thinking about. On this episode with Danielle, we talk a lot about how to do the work yourself and how to get out of your own head and how to improve yourself so you can feel more pleasure and be in the moment and all that sort of stuff and little things you can do. But I'm saying this because I know my audience. A lot of you guys are like me, and a lot of you guys take on too much responsibility. And sometimes the problem in your sexual journey is you, and you do need to do a better job of, changing the environment to be more suitable, or working on your thoughts in the moment, or working on not thinking at all in that moment and overcoming some uncomfortable feelings and that sort of stuff. But sometimes the problem's not you. And I just want to make it very clear that a lot of people, this is not the time and place to say all this. Maybe I'll dedicate another episode to it. But a lot of people I've worked with and some of my own personal experiences, awful things happen to you when it comes to sex, and people, especially with bulimia and binge eating recovery or binge eating past, they've experienced mean things that people have done to their body. They've experienced people using sex in a really negative way. And I'm not going to describe all those things here because I don't want to trigger anyone, but just if you feel like you're in a situation, a sexual situation that is not okay, you're probably right. And it's not just you. And I just want you to know that if you listen to this, hoping to improve your own sex life with yourself or specifically with a partner, and you're doing all the work and things still aren't working, I just want to invite you to think that maybe the problem isn't all on you and not to put it solely on yourself to experience the ultimate pleasure, right? When you're working with someone that maybe isn't on the same page as you. And then I invite you not to take all the responsibility on yourself and just kind of talk to someone in your personal life about it. Or just don't keep it all to yourself. It's not all on you is what I'm trying to say. Hopefully that came out clear. Probably not though, but that's all right. That's kind of the nature of the podcast. Without further ado, here's Danielle Savory and I talking about sex and pleasure.
Welcome everyone listening. I have a very special guest here today and to talk about a subject that I think I have been avoiding for a while, but I knew if I talked about it on the podcast, I really wanted Danielle Savory to be with us on the podcast. And she is a sex and pleasure coach. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. But something I love about Danielle is she teaches women and other people how to kind of be much more in their bodies and how important pleasure really is to them and how to embrace it. And I think a lot of us, especially those of us that have struggled with our bodies or eating disorders or anything like that, or just general daily life things, it gets harder and harder to embrace that side of ourselves and be in our bodies and even think that receiving pleasure or wanting pleasure is a good thing. So, Danielle, I'm really happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here and talking with you all today.
Yeah. And I was telling Danielle a little bit before this, but I have a long list of questions. Not a long list. I asked my audience beforehand too if they had any questions they wanted me to ask you.
Yeah.
And usually my interviews, how I talk with people is that it's kind of an organic conversation back and forth, which I'll try to make it that way, but I also might just be like, okay, what about this question?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
a little different.
I'm
But
all open for rapid fire as well. So wherever it takes us.
awesome. Something I was listening to your podcast obviously before this. And for those of you guys that don't know, Danielle has a podcast called It's My Pleasure. Highly recommend. And again, it's about all the things that we just said. But I was listening to the one about ADHD neurodivergence because I thought it might be a good one to listen for my audience. And I love the thing about the bed squeaking and how you said someone just needed to fix the bed and that made it a whole lot better. And I thought about myself and I was like, oh yeah, when the bed squeak is really annoying, it completely takes you out of it. But like simple things like that can just completely take away from any pleasure you experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, I love that we're starting here because I think that sometimes, especially when it comes to sex and pleasure, it can feel like a very heavy topic. You know, it can feel like there's so many things that are involved, or I need to do all of this, this healing before I can experience pleasure, before I can feel intimate with somebody. And I don't want to take away from the fact that there is a lot of healing that we can do, and it doesn't have to be as heavy as hard as we take it. Like we can also have levity with this topic. We can also be more playful with this topic. We can also understand like the very small, normal everyday occurrences, like a bed squeaking that is going to completely pull us out of the moment, and understand and normalize that it's like, yeah, there might be some, I like to think of it as like a hose that's leaking, which, a side note, my hose leaked this weekend and my entire basement flooded. So
oh my
it
God.
feels like a very like real thing right now, but like a hose, right? So you think about a garden hose and how, depending on how much water comes out the end, is like how much the faucet is turned on, of course, if there's kinks in the hose or if there's little holes in the hose. And when we think about pleasure, thinking about your capacity to expand pleasure, we can always turn on the faucet higher. That's like our turn on. But there's all these things that might be putting a kink in the hose or holes in the hose. And the more that we plug those holes up, the more that we like smooth out the passage of things, the more pleasure that we're going to have at the end. And so, like a bed squeaking sort of situation, or for me, if my bedroom is really like messy or the sun is right in my eyes, it seems like there are these small things, but understanding how the brain is constantly surveying for things to be distracted by or to look out for threats. We're constantly scanning, paying attention to these small things can make a huge difference. So yes, we can make difference with the big things and the rewiring our beliefs and dropping into our body and doing healing that's necessary. And you can also experience like so much more pleasure by just paying attention to these little small things that we might be able to iron out, like a squeak in the bed, or if your feet are cold, or if there's a noise going on in the background that's really distracting. Like, do those things first, because they will add up and they will allow at least some more flow to come out of your hose and to enjoy yourself a little bit more. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think when people get into their healing journeys and learn about mindsets and thought work and all that sort of stuff, they immediately think, I need to do all the work in here internally. Yeah. And there is work you need to do, but then they don't think about those easy little things you can fix or change. And I honestly, when I heard that, I didn't put it together till a day ago when you said it, but I was like, wow, I just thought I should just get over it, like I should
Yeah.
just be better. And people, I think, are more likely to blame themselves, like you should just be able to keep going and it should be fine. And
Yeah.
no, if it really bothers you and it doesn't take that much to change it and then see how you go.
Yeah. Like if you want to do the mental gymnastics around your squeaky bed, go for it. And we don't have to. Like it just makes the journey so much harder. It's like do your mental gymnastics around your body image or feeling more comfortable in your body, right? Like connecting with yourself and pleasure. Like if you're going to do like take on a cognitive load and put on the effort towards something, make it something like that and give yourself like the easy button when it comes to very simple things that you can just change in your environment. We don't need to put all of our effort into changing exactly every single thing that's distracting us in order to like experience more pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like save it for the big things. And that being said, that's a big question I wanted to ask. I think one other question someone asked me that we can go on with is like how to get comfortable with your body when you struggle with insecurities and things like that. I have my own thoughts on it, but what would you say when it comes to being comfortable with your body, even if you have issues with body image and stuff with sex and pleasure?
Yeah, yeah. So this is obviously like a big question, and there's a bunch of different ways that I could go with this. But the first thing that I want to acknowledge is thinking about your experience with your body, especially when it comes to pleasure or your relationship, as this like holistic experience, like it's a full relationship. And like, what do you want to invest in this relationship like it was another person? And so often, where so many of us get caught up is like in the body image, but I want to focus on the word image, right? The body image is one sense. It's a sensory experience of our visualization, like what we're seeing. And there's so many different ways that we can relate to another person and our own bodies through different sense organs other than just our eyes. And what I have found for myself and a lot of other clients who have really suffered with body images, we can start again at a place where it might be more accessible for us before we're taking the image part into it. So really like, how do we get more comfortable? It's like, where do you already feel maybe a little bit of comfort or where feels like the most accessible to you? So it could even be something like listening to music you really enjoy. Now, I know that sounds like, oh, that's not really relating to my body, but when you're paying attention and there's music that you really like and you're allowing yourself to feel your body's response to music that lights you up, whether it's dancing or you're driving in the car and there's just an emotion that comes up, acknowledging that it is your body that is allowing that experience to happen. Your body is allowing like this music to like touch your soul or wake something up in you, or like you're allowing yourself to like move your hips or whatever it might be. When we start to have a different relationship with our body that's appreciative, that's understanding, that's even like grateful, like, I love this song. Like, thank you, body, for having like the mechanisms that allow me to enjoy this. And I know that might sound kind of like awkward or silly, but it's like we start somewhere. And if you are feeling, on a scale of -10 to +10, right? And we want to get to this place where it's like love, like completely loving your body, let's say, is like a +10. And right now, your relationship with your body is like a -6 or -7. Doing these small little things, what if we just get to a -4? Like we want to get all the way to this place where we fully embrace everything and we're fully in love. And I totally believe that's possible for everybody. And we don't need to go from a -6 to a +10. Like, what is it that can just switch us 1 degree up And when you start to tap into other sense organs, like your actual like sensory experiences, and at the same time acknowledging that is part of your body and that it's bringing you delight, it's bringing you joy, it's bringing you pleasure, then we start to create this more trusting and beautiful bond with our body of like, thank you for delivering me that taste of that summer strawberry that just lit my whole mouth up. Like, that was so cool. Like, thank you, body. And when we start to create that type of a relationship, then we get to build on it. Then we get to go into maybe more of these other places like image, which might feel a little bit more red hot right now, or might be feel like such a hard one to take on. Because as you create this different relationship with your body of appreciation, of gratitude, of delight, of joy, what you're also doing is you're creating a foundation of resilience. You're creating a foundation and you're creating evidence that your relationship with your body can change. So then when you decide to start taking a look at your body and start to merge into that, changing that relationship you have with your actual image, like I said, you have evidence, you have this background foundation, what it feels like in your nervous system, you're already going to feel more calm and more at ease because you have created a pleasurable relationship with other sensory organs. And this is just one more that you get to bring into the picture. This is one more that you get to invite along to have an accepting, appreciative relationship with your body. So that's where I would start, is really thinking about how can I enjoy my body with my other sense organs, whether it be touch, taste, sound, smell, and acknowledging that it's my body that are bringing this delightful, pleasurable experience before and bringing up that resilience and resourcefulness, rewiring your brain so that when you do flirt with the image, it doesn't feel as challenging or as hard because you are well resourced in your brain and you have evidence to do that.
Yeah, it feels more malleable, more possible
Yeah.
to change. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Something that came up while you were talking about that too is, when the person was asking about body insecurities, and then you're like, go to a place in your body where you can appreciate how you're receiving some sort of pleasure from it, or some sort of something that it's doing for you, and
Yeah.
other senses. And it just made me think about how much sex, when you're really in it, and I think truly enjoying yourself, maybe I'm speaking just for myself, it has very little to do with what you look like, and a lot more to
Yeah.
do with what you feel, and what your body is doing for you, and what you're receiving, what you're giving. And I think a lot of times, especially as women, we're taught to be desired, and that is part of our
Yes.
pleasure. And we don't really think about, well, what do I like? What am I feeling? What is my body doing for me? And I think when you appreciate your body from what it actually is giving you and the experiences you can have that are only just for you, even if another person
Yeah.
is helping you feel those things, it gives you such a different experience altogether that takes you away from something distracting, such as body image. But then I do like what you're saying of, if you can start small and go to that -4 instead of a -6, when you
Mhm.
start to flirt with this idea of, maybe I like my body image, or maybe I can feel good in my own skin and how it looks, it's a little bit more possible or tangible because you've practiced these other ways to appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important what you brought up because, especially in heterosexual relationships, but a relationship, if you've been socialized as a woman in general, right? It's so much of our worth and everything is put into being an object of desire and being an object of pleasure for other people. And we have been taught and been wired to feel turned on or to feel pleasure when we are wanted, when we are desired, because we've been told so much of our worth and our validation comes from that. And so when we've been taught and socialized in that way, of course, it's harder to switch into this place of like just receiving and enjoying and not worrying about how are they looking at my body, or what does my body look like in this position, or what are they thinking, or are they having a good time? Are they enjoying themselves? Am I taking too long? Like all of the things that go through our mind, which has more to do with getting into the mind of our partner instead of really truly allowing ourselves to experience it from our own perspective. And so that switch of coming back, and a great question to ask yourself, like, where is my mind in this moment? Am I in a role of a giver, or am I in a role of receiver? And how much more can you come back to the role of being the receiver, and even practicing this? This is why I think it's a beautiful practice to have, and we can leave it in the show notes. But I have a free guide on this of being able to be the receiver of your own touch, and whether you can decide how far you want to take it. But think about it just in like your morning shower or putting lotion on your body. Usually, most of us are thinking about other stuff during the day. We're like not really connected with it, versus thinking about getting your hair washed at the salon. And it can feel like this luxurious experience, and you're just lying there and you're feeling like the fingers massaging your head. Like, what if during your own morning ritual that you already do, you acknowledge the fact that you're receiving your own touch? You acknowledge the fact that, like, I'm putting lotion on my body, but be the receiver. Like, oh, thank you. Thank you for moisturizing the skin. And actually actively bring it in. Bring it in and practice being the receiver, and that, using that skill set then when you transition to the bedroom, makes it so much easier. But we never practice actively receiving. And if we're not practicing actively receiving, it's really hard, especially during sexual situations, for our brain all of a sudden, when it's always been conditioned to be a giver and care about being an object of pleasure, to go into receivership. And so when you practice that outside of it, then we can then go and actually be part of the experience and bring in all of the pleasure that our bodies are wired for, especially during sensual and sexual experiences.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. Especially, I thought about, I washed my hair this morning and washed my face. And I know that you should be gentle with your face, obviously, for like wrinkles and skincare. But I definitely was just like, just like really rough with it. And I'm like, I'm not, not only am I not thinking about how I receive my own touch, but I'm not touching myself very well. I'm very much so going through the motions. So I like practicing the idea of receiving. And then you're right, it's hard to switch gears from give, suddenly receiving. It feels uncomfortable. And you're like, this, I shouldn't be doing this. And that brings up another question for me, which is, and someone else brought this up, especially with, someone who socialized as a woman, you wanting things seen, especially with it, when it comes to sex and pleasure, it's seen as gluttonous or slutty or something like that. It's seen as indecent sometimes, depending on where you were, where you grew up and what you learned. So I'd say, what advice do you have for someone like that feels like there's some sort of thing in them that says this is wrong to want this, this is selfish?
Well, first I would say welcome to the club.
Yeah.
Straight up. Like, I think it's so important for us to understand that regardless of the home that we were brought up in, if there was faith-based religion, we have all been marinating still. Like I said, regardless of your own personal experience, we are all living in a culture that women have been shamed around pleasure and around our sexuality. And we continue to see it to this day. And so start by offering yourself this level of compassion. Like, of course you feel this way. Like, where have you ever been taught, or when have you ever been taught that this was not only like okay, but let alone encouraged that you should pursue it, that this is for you? Like, we have not been taught that. We have been taught the opposite. And when we understand how the brain works from an evolutionary standpoint, and how important it is for the human being to feel like they belong and they're not exiled, us keeping a distance from our sexuality, us understanding that this wasn't really safe for us is really, really important for our overall like evolutionary process of belonging. Like then you're going to be exiled from your family, from your church, from your peers at school who are now slut shaming you. Like there's so many instances where there's such a real and true fear of being like the scarlet A going out into the world that of course it feels uncomfortable. And we can also acknowledge that we want to change that is something somebody else or another society or culture or belief system planted in us. And I'm no longer willing to buy into that. That how can sexuality and pleasure truly be for me? So at the beginning, just start with your hand on your heart and go, oh my love, of course. Like woman, this is so true for all of us. Like this is something that we've all gone through. Like, of course you feel this tightening in your chest, the sinking in your stomach when you think about going here. And like, I've got you. It's okay. We'll take baby steps, really oozing with the self-compassion and not shaming yourself for feeling the way that all of us feel in this society because of what we've been taught. And then understanding just this basic like neuroplasticity fact that we can change how we believe and we think. And I want to feel more empowered in my sexuality because I know that that allows me to be whole. Why would I reject one part of me that makes me human? Why would I, disregard this part or think that it's wrong or think that it's bad? Like, how does that help me? And start asking yourself those questions. And when it comes to sexual pleasure, right, our relationship with pleasure is so messed up. We always talk about pleasures as a guilty pleasure or reward after we've been a good girl or something that is, again, to be enjoyed by somebody else. Like, of course, it's okay for somebody else to enjoy your body for their pleasure, but God forbid you enjoy your own body for your own pleasure. Like we just want to start like peeling these beliefs and untangling them by questioning, like, does that even make sense? Like, does that like honestly make sense in the world for me? Like, it doesn't. And, maybe I'm not all the way there, but I'm learning to think and see things in a different way. I'm learning to see that this is part of the fabric of me as a human being, and that pleasure is actually going to resource my brain, like help with my overall well-being, help with my physical being, my physiology. It helps me create connection with myself, with other people. When you start to see what a beautiful thing that this can be for you and for your relationship, if you're in one, it's a game changer. But start with that level of compassion and then start planting these little seeds and questions of curiosity and see where that takes you.
Yeah, I love that answer. Especially going first with compassion and whenever you have those feelings, because you can intellectually know this isn't wrong. I get that these things aren't founded in solid principles, but then still feel the reactive innate thing that you learned a long time ago, and it just feels wrong. And you're like, oh my gosh. So just being kind, like, of course you feel that way. Just because you're automatically reacting this way doesn't mean that it's maybe correct, but that makes total sense. And I feel you. But then also questioning the beliefs a little bit. I like doing that with food and body image stuff and all we've learned with society, but with sex too. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Why did they even want it to be this way? Like, what's the point of this? And I think a lot of it, especially with people that are socialized as women, it comes down to, I feel like, a lot of control, right? And trying to keep people oppressed. And I wanted to ask you this, but you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think it's a helpful thing in helping people want pleasure. Like, what's the point outside of the bedroom? Because I had a client one time, and I was this way myself in some sense. She was talking about how she was like, I don't need to have sex. That part of my life is done. And she was 40. It's not like she was in her 90s and all these things. And I think it was because she viewed sex a lot more like it was something she had to do for someone else. But even for me, I was trying to a long time ago be like, oh, I don't really need to have sex. Like, that's not something in my life. But there are benefits. So I'd say, what's the point of having your own pleasure outside of the bedroom?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's something that I continuously want to explore and bring to light in so many different ways. Because in order for us to even be willing to do the work to come back to our bodies, to be able to open up sexually, like we have to think of the effort that we're going to put into this is worth the result that we're going to get. And oftentimes, I think the way that we think about sex is it's this very, it's like almost in a box. It's like we put sex in a silo from everything else that's part of our life, right? And so when you think about it in that way, like, oh, well, I don't really need it because it's just like an orgasm or it's like a way to connect with my partner, then of course it's not going to feel worth it most of the time because it's still something you're giving away. So even paying attention to like, is this something that I think of like giving to my partner? And most of us, even if you have awareness around it, there are so many nuanced ways that we are still operating on the belief that we're giving it away, that it's for somebody else. When we say something even like, oh, well, I have a really bad headache. We hear this in sitcoms and forever, like I have a headache, use the headache excuse, or my wife has a headache. And even in this situation, now I don't want to take away that if you're physically feeling ill, that there isn't, that you shouldn't partake or there couldn't be some benefits. But what we know, especially about headaches, the way that pleasure floods the body with things like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, it actually can also create endogenous pain relief. And pleasure allows us to, meet some of the ailments that we may have, but we don't think about it that way. We don't think about it like we're more likely to go reach for Advil than reaching for something that could give us like sustainable, nourishing pleasure. And so there's a whole host of benefits. It's like immune system is boosted with pleasure. Our stress is reduced with pleasure. Our ability to have social interactions is reduced by pleasure. The way that we can flood our brain again with these like neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin that help with our overall mood and well-being, reducing our heart rate, reducing chances of heart disease. Like there's literally so many things when we really look at like the mechanical aspect of what pleasure does in the body. For me, because my background's neuroscience, I love the brain. I always love to find like ways that like, how is my brain benefiting? Like what's going on in my brain? And when we think about pleasure, pleasure becomes an easy access point for us. Like we can understand turning towards pleasure. And sexual pleasure is, when we look at the way that our body is wired, is the source of the most pleasure that we can experience from, a mechanical aspect of anything else. And again, studies have shown that with orgasms, with this kind of thing, like the amount of regions of your brain and the amount of oxygenation that happens with an orgasm in your brain is higher than any other activity that you can do. And the way that it just totally, and it just like lights it up, and we don't talk about it, right? We don't talk about how it opens up your brain to creativity, how it actually allows you to start formulating new thoughts because the neuroplasticity that happens during these times where we're totally pleasured and at ease. Like there are so many ways, and this is honestly why I feel that so many women where we kind of reach this ceiling is because pleasure is like this last frontier we really haven't given ourselves complete permission to do, that men, and I'm stereotyping here, but in general, men haven't had a negative relationship with. They haven't held themselves back from pleasure, sexual or otherwise, for the most part. Women, we restrict it. We keep it as a luxury, maybe. And even if we do, we taint the experience by thinking we shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
I wasted my time. I could have slept more, right? So we taint the whole experience. And when we do that, we actually negate any neurochemicals that we created, because now we're overcoming them with more stress, like hormones and cortisol and adrenaline and all these other things, by shaming ourselves for having the experience in the first place. So again, there's a whole laundry list of things that why it's worth it. For me, why I love to think about it is how it's changing my brain, the resources that I'm creating. It's like, if you want to be happier and have more good experiences, like, why wouldn't I give my brain every chance? And leaning into pleasure is going to lean you into more joy, to more satisfaction, to more delight. Like, we have to practice feeling good if we want our brain to be wired for good. And your pleasure and your sensual experiences and your sexual experiences is a beautiful place for you to practice actually feeling good in your body.
Yeah. Yeah. That was something else you said in a podcast I was listening to, but it really is like what you're practicing, aside from all the benefits you just mentioned, when you're experiencing your body, feeling pleasure, practicing that, it transfers to other areas in your life. Just like if you did that in other areas, you can transfer it to this place too. But then on top of that, all the benefits that you get from it, I was thinking about how men, I don't know what the study is, or they're like, men need to masturbate once a day for their health, right? And for everything. And I'm sure that is the exact same for women, but there's not as many studies done on women, all that sort of stuff. And it's just frustrating. But like, of course, there's tons of benefits to feeling that. And I think it's so frustrating that we talk about that way with exercise, with taking a nice walk or doing anything good for you that just makes you feel happy, but yet because there's so much stigma around it, then it's an issue. Just think about how society,
and it's actually the like right. And the thing is that's so cool is like, if you actually focused on this part, because there is so much tied up into it, because it's taboo, because there's so much that we have to kind of like overcome in order for ourselves to give like full permission. Your personal growth, your connection to your body, your way that you talk to yourself, treat yourself, all of these things that we talk about in the personal growth realm, that growth is actually catapulted when you start with sexuality, when you start with your relationship with pleasure and sex, because so many of the other people-pleasing beliefs or perfectionism or what are they thinking or the giving versus receiving, they're all tied there. And those get like addressed really, really quickly when you're like, how much desire do I feel today? Why am I cutting myself off from pleasure? Why do I not feel okay with my body, with like sex, whatever it might be? And that's what I really, really love about actually starting here or focusing on here is I have watched women who have been doing personal growth stuff for 10 years get more results in just like a few months because of how much other stuff is wrapped up that gets brought to their awareness when they focus on their sexuality. Like, it's always there, it's always lurking, but it might, like, going through it through other realms might create such a harder time for it to be brought to the surface. And it could take you a couple of years to uncover, oh my gosh, look at how I'm people pleasing here, where it's like, you pay attention to one sex session and you notice like how much guilt or how much shame or how much whatever else. And so that's what's so cool about this. Plus the benefits are also just catapulted because you're connected to your body. Like so much of our other stuff, we don't connect to our body. You can't change your sex life and be disconnected from your body.
Ooh, that's a powerful statement. And I would, to confirm your theory of, or not theory, but it's founded in science and what you've seen, the self-growth work that you do and all that sort of stuff, you can make more progress in 2 months with focusing on your sex life and pleasure. I would affirm that's been true for me. Like, I did a lot of self-growth work and then finally went through my own journey of, exploring sexual health and my own pleasure. And I changed a lot in like the span of a year because of that. And I was like, holy crap. And then one of my clients, I worked with her for a while. She was able to get over the bulimia thing. And then she went on her own journey of really exploring her own sex life. Then another one did too. And they're completely different people now. And it's not that what they did before wasn't good, but they were missing this component. So agreed.
Yeah. Because pleasure is important. And even when we do the other self-growth stuff, we don't actually spend time pursuing pleasure or creating room for pleasure or connecting with pleasure, which not only creates this deep relationship with your body, but you're focusing on good stuff. Like you're focusing on feeling good. Like, believe it or not, like that is a thing to actually feel good and enjoy our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm rushing along because I still have a few more questions, and I don't want to, I know I
Yes.
want to be respectful. But one thing you haven't said it, but I think I know the answer to this, but how do you feel about self-pleasure? Because I think when people listen to this, they might be thinking about, oh, partnership, sex, and that sort of stuff. But
Mhm.
I've had several clients and myself tell me about how sometimes like a little self-love session or something can help, especially if they're feeling extreme feelings or something like that. But it's really important too to, have self-pleasure, to feel that without anyone else. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge advocate for self-pleasure for a number of different things. The reason I love using the word self-pleasure versus something like masturbation is because to me, masturbation feels very very constricting. The
Mm.
way that we usually think about masturbation is you go in, you have this agenda, you climax, it's over. And self-pleasure, it can encompass so much more. Maybe it's involving your genitals, maybe not, but really it's this relationship for yourself to be the giver and the receiver. So before we were talking about receivership, there's such this bond that is formed when you acknowledge that you're giving yourself loving touch or pleasurable touch and you get to be the receiver of it. It's so empowering being the creator and the one that is benefiting from what you're creating. And with self-pleasure too, there's so many other things that we don't consider that this can be other than just climaxing or having a good time. It can be a healing session. It can be, self-pleasure is something that I have used to work through and process through some emotions that feel really hard. So I know
Mhm.
that on this podcast, you talk a lot about like emotional processing, paying attention to our feelings. And so often, if we're not used to doing that, the brain can get really freaked out. Like, what is it going to be like going into my body and feeling grief or feeling shame? And so oftentimes we'll notice that our attention will quickly go outside of our body. It will go back to our brain because it feels so uncomfortable. When you start with pleasure and you start even an emotional processing practice with feeling good, then we've now created this safe entrance into our body, this safe way for our attention to reside in our body. We're like, see, it's okay. It's safe. It feels good. And then doing that, then we can turn towards the thing that's a little bit hard and it doesn't feel as harsh. Think about it, it's like using honey for balm to your sore throat. We can process, our body can heal, our body can go through what it needs to do to get rid of the sore throat. And we don't have to make it as painful if we coat it with a little bit of honey. And that's why I love to think about self-pleasure is like we're really creating this buffer system that allows us to handle the hard, to meet our body through the challenges, to allow ourselves to stay in our bodies, to not disconnect regardless of what's coming up. Plus, it can just be fun. It can
Yeah.
feel really good.
It
It can
doesn't
be a
have
good
to be all
time.
that.
Let's be real about that stuff too.
What? You want to do that just to have fun?
Yeah.
No, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. All right, I love that too. The other thing I want to ask is I know people they'll want to know, how do you get out of your damn head and into,
Yeah.
because it goes everywhere. So what do you do?
Yeah, this is a great question. You need to practice a little bit more than just during sex.
Mm.
And I say this with so much love, but it's like in general, our brain has a really hard time focusing. And especially in modern day where we have so many things vying for our attention at any given time, all the notifications on your phone, the beeps, the blings, like there is so much. Our brain is really used to constantly being stimulated. So when you slow down, like go for a walk and don't do anything. Have you ever done that? Like go for a walk and not listen to music, not listen to a podcast, like really be present. It's super hard. Your brain wants to go to a problem. Your brain wants to go to like oh, did I remember to do this? It is really hard because your brain is used to constant stimulation. So the more that you practice being present, connecting with your senses, allowing your brain to feel more comfortable slowing down, the easier it's going to be during sex. But typically we don't practice, and then we get into a sexual situation and we're like, why is my brain doing this? It's like, hello, your brain always does this. Like this, just because it's sex, you're noticing it because you want to be focusing on your partner or what it feels like in your body. Like you want to be there. And so you're noticing now how distracted it is. So, really allowing yourself to just normalize it, practice doing it outside of the bedroom, and then during the moment, just be like, oh, there I went again. Okay, what am I noticing here? What feels good right now? What do those fingers feel like? What does that touch feel like? Like connecting with, looking at your partner's eyes, or if you're in a self-pleasure session, like letting yourself moan a little bit and hearing it, using the tools that we have to like bring our body back in. My brain has a hard time doing this too. So I have to prompt it with questions. Like, what feels the best right now, brain? Like, give it a treasure hunt, like, give it something to go and solve. And your brain is going to be like, versus like, just stay present. Like, what's going on? Like, give it like some kind of task. And that makes it a lot easier for that transition.
I like that. Yeah. Sometimes it's good to just focus on one thing and really ground yourself with that. Like, but asking yourself a question of what is the most pleasurable thing, or where do you feel it most right now? That's smart. I want to ask you how people can find you, but is there any other thing, people listening, that I guess they're out there struggling and they're not sure if this is really relevant to them at all, or that they think that part of their life is dead or they're better off without it? Is there any final advice you would give to them?
Yeah, I would start with just understanding that your complete relationship with your body can change when you allow yourself and give yourself permission for pleasure, to permission to actually feel good. And that might look, very small at the beginning. That might look like you going outside and literally smelling the roses, but like act like go show up with intention. Like, I'm going to smell this and I'm going to see how it lights my body up. I'm going to allow myself to like really relish in it. And, pleasure can be, again, such a healing thing that we use. It can bring us back to our body. It can bring us back and reconnect to this body that felt like it wasn't ever a great relationship that we had. Like, we really can transform our whole relationship with our body through the lens of pleasure. And so giving yourself permission for pleasure, noticing when you're holding yourself back, and then also understanding that your body is a work of habit. It is going to consistently try and bring you back into these patterns of feeling shame, of rejection, of frustration, of irritation. And so in these moments where you recognize like, oh, body, like you really want to bring me back here. Of course you do. This is what's familiar. This is what we've been doing for years. This is what we keep going to because it's what is known. But today we're going to practice opening our eyes to what's delightful. Today we're going to practice smelling what lights us up. Today we're going to practice letting our taste buds just, like blossom with a flavor that just like lights us all up. Like today we're going to slow down and savor these moments of pleasure, even though I can feel you really wanting to pull us back into this old pattern.
Yeah, it's really gentle to phrase it that way too. For today, we're gonna be here. I
Yeah.
know you want to go this way, but just stay with me and stay here and
Yeah.
kind of hold your hand, your brain's hand along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, well, thank you, Danielle. That is so much advice. So thank you so much for being on it and giving that.
Yeah.
I can't wait to share this. Like I know people are gonna love it. So thank you for that. Where can people find you if they want to work with you or know more about you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at The Practice of Pleasure. You can go to my website, daniellesavory.com. There's a couple things I mentioned, the Savory Starter Guide. That's just daniellesavory.com/savory-starter. That's a great way for all of you, just what I've been talking about, like introducing this new relationship with your body through the lens of pleasure. A very comprehensive guide. It's totally free to you to get started on that journey. And then other than that, my podcast called It's My Pleasure.
Yeah, and your podcast is awesome. I've listened. I mean, I think I first found it during 2020. You had it out then, right?
Yeah.
It's like, who is this person? And then over the years,
that's so fun. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well,
so
then
fun finding longtime listeners.
I did, yeah. I popped in and out throughout the years, and then I don't know. This year, like I said, I've gone through my own sexual journey. I was like, I need to have someone on the podcast to talk about it. I am not brave enough to talk about it myself, and then I thought of you. So thank you for being along, even though you didn't know it, with my journey too, and all the advice you offer and help to other people.
Yeah, thank you. It's been my pleasure being here today.
We'll close it out. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Bye.